She walked into her ex's engagement party alone. No entourage. No designer gown.
Just her name, and a legacy he never understood.
His new fiancée?
Smiled sweet. Then humiliated her in front of 200 guests, on the MIC.
But what none of them knew was that someone in that room had been watching.
Waiting. And when she stepped forward, one sentence changed everything. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever made you feel like you didn't belong,
this story is your reminder.
Sometimes, the most powerful woman in the room is the one they tried to silence. They say time heals all wounds. But what they don't tell you is, some wounds don't need healing. They need to be remembered. Because memory keeps us from returning to the fire we barely escaped from. Nadine Carter stood at the edge of the marble terrace, a champagne flute untouched in her hand, while the glittering skyline of Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond her. The lights below blinked like 1,000 eyes watching, waiting. It was the kind of evening built for celebration, for legacy and power. But for Nadine, it felt like walking into a funeral, one where her dignity had been presumed dead. 6 months ago, she had walked out of Oliver Prescott's penthouse with nothing but a duffel bag, her mother's rosary, and her name.
Everyone called it madness. You're throwing away security, her friends warned. He adores you, her aunt begged. But they didn't see the nights she came home with a tired smile and was met with cold silence.
They didn't hear the veiled compliments. You're doing great, for someone from your background, or the way his friends clapped her back like a novelty act when she spoke about healthcare reform. They didn't see how Oliver, heir to a legacy of hedge fund dynasties and art foundations, stopped introducing her as Nadine Carter, the woman who'd opened 3 medical clinics in Harlem. No, she became Nadine, my fiancée. With a soft chuckle, like that explained enough.
And the final blow?
At a charity gala, a senator had patted her arm and said, "It's inspiring how Oliver's helping you build something meaningful." Oliver had smiled, never corrected him. That night, Nadine realized, she wasn't in love with Oliver. She was trying to earn space in a world that thought she should be grateful just to stand in it.
So she left. No public statement, no final Instagram post. Just silence.
Now, standing under chandeliers worth more than her clinic's annual budget, Nadine felt that silence echo. Oliver's engagement to Emily Radcliffe, daughter of a British banking mogul, was the social event of the season.
Their love was a magazine spread come to life. And yet, her name had made the guest list.
The invitation had come on ivory stock, laced with gold trim. At first, Nadine thought it was a mistake.
Then she saw the attached guest list. Donors. Policy makers.
Global health executives.
People she'd tried for years to get meetings with.
And suddenly, it was clear, this wasn't a celebration.
This was a stage. And she wasn't just an ex. She was a test.
As Nadine walked into the hall, heads turned. Conversations paused just long enough to create discomfort.
She knew what they were thinking. Why is she here? Doesn't she know she lost?
But what they didn't know, what not even Oliver understood, was that Nadine didn't come to be seen. She came to be remembered. I didn't lose him, she whispered to herself, spine straightening.
I freed myself.
The music dimmed. The lights warmed. Across the room, Oliver and Emily stood near a tiered champagne tower.
He caught her gaze.
And for a flicker of a second, his smile faltered. Nadine turned away, not out of defeat, but out of choice.
She'd cried enough.
She'd questioned enough.
Tonight, she wasn't seeking revenge. She was the reminder.
And soon, everyone in that room would realize they hadn't invited a footnote.
They'd invited the storm.
The first thing Nadine noticed about Emily wasn't her beauty. It wasn't the glittering diamond the size of a nickel on her left hand. It was the way she made eye contact. Sharp, deliberate, predatory. "Nadine, isn't it?" Emily said, walking up with that kind of smile women are taught to use in cold wars, warm on the surface, poisonous underneath. "I'm so glad you could make it." Oliver was worried the past might make things complicated. Nadine returned the smile like armor. "I imagine the future's complicated enough without needing help from the past." Emily tilted her head.
"Oh, not at all. I mean, you're very inspiring.
I heard about your little clinics, how passionate. It must be rewarding."
There it was, little. That word always came with a pat on the head. Nadine stood taller.
"We've served over 12,000 uninsured patients in the last year alone. Rewarding doesn't quite cover it."
Oliver stepped in, awkwardly.
"Nadine, you look amazing."
"Thank you," she replied. She didn't owe him a compliment. Not anymore.
As Emily and Oliver drifted away, Nadine felt the tightness in her chest return.
She scanned the room.
The event wasn't just a celebration, it was a network power map. Pharmaceutical CEOs, tech donors, foreign dignitaries. Every handshake tonight could mean funding or policy shifts.
She wasn't here for closure. She was here for strategy. But Emily wasn't done.
Throughout the evening, she stalked Nadine like a specter. Always close enough to be heard, never close enough to be confronted. The barbs came in waves. Still single, Nadine? You're so brave. It must be hard, seeing Oliver so happy. I admire your resilience.
But Nadine didn't flinch.
Her restraint was surgical. She countered by building alliances. A South African doctor who wanted to mirror her mobile unit model, a health policy lead at the WHO intrigued by her ideas on preventative care. Emily noticed. And with every conversation Nadine held her own in, Emily's mask cracked, only slightly, but enough. She whispered something in Oliver's ear. His brows furrowed, lips tight. Nadine watched him nod, reluctant. Then came the announcement. Emily would give a toast.
A hush fell. Glasses raised. Eyes locked on her.
Love, Emily began, isn't just about finding someone. It's about finding someone who understands your world.
Who shares your values.
And knowing when someone doesn't belong.
Her eyes flicked toward Nadine. Some relationships exist to teach us lessons.
Others?
To show us what's possible.
And sometimes, the best thing someone can do is walk away.
There was polite applause. But the room didn't buzz. It tensed. And Nadine?
She didn't move.
But something in her heart turned.
Something that said, let her have this moment. Because the next one belongs to you. The sound of clinking glasses barely filled the silence Emily left behind. Her toast, laced with veiled jabs and smug superiority, hung in the air like smoke after a firework, briefly dazzling, now choking. Nadine sat motionless, back straight, eyes steady.
Not one muscle flinched.
Emily might have thought she'd sealed the narrative, rebranded Nadine as the ex, the mistake, the lesson in what not to be. But what she didn't know was that Nadine had stopped being a footnote in anyone else's story the moment she walked out of that penthouse. And now, a new chapter was about to begin. Then it happened. A rustle near the front. Someone rising. Not a staff member, not a speaker on the program. A woman, elegant, dignified, her silver hair swept into a chignon. The room fell quiet as she approached the MIC. Her posture was commanding, not arrogant. Her presence, undeniable. I hope you'll forgive the interruption, she began, her voice calm but firm. I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight. But I believe there's something all of you deserve to know before you raise another glass. A beat of silence. Then murmurs, recognition.
Some of the older guests sat straighter. A few looked nervous. My name is Eleanor Prescott.
I'm Oliver's godmother and former chair of the Prescott Family Trust. I've spent the last 30 years working in global philanthropy, particularly in medical equity and access. And I've been watching tonight with great interest. Oliver stood frozen. Emily blinked rapidly, not quite smiling anymore. When I first heard about Oliver's engagement, Eleanor continued, I was pleased.
Until I saw the guest list.
Until I realized who was invited. And why. And most importantly, who was being diminished. Eleanor turned her head slowly, meeting Nadine's gaze. Miss Carter, would you mind standing? Nadine, unsure, rose slowly. Every eye in the room turned to her. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor said, what many of you may not know is that this woman, Nadine Carter, runs one of the most effective community health infrastructures on the East Coast. Her clinics have not only saved lives, they've done what many governments have failed to do, deliver dignity to underserved populations. And last year, it was her model that informed the Prescott Foundation's International Mobile Health Initiative.
Gasps. Whispers.
One man at a nearby table murmured, wait, she's the one who? Yes, Eleanor said as if she heard him. She's the one. And without her guidance, and her silent collaboration, often unpaid, I might add, this family's biggest philanthropic win of the decade would not exist.
The silence turned electric.
So when we talk about values and compatibility, she continued, now fully facing Emily, perhaps we should ask, who truly understands the world of service, of sacrifice, of earned respect?
Emily opened her mouth. Nothing came out.
And let's not forget, Eleanor said, her eyes sharpening, that Miss Carter was not merely invited here tonight.
She was baited, disrespected,
and insulted by a toast that assumed superiority built on money and bloodlines.
Now the audience was visibly shifting. Some were nodding.
Others looked stunned. Eleanor turned to Nadine. Forgive me for not intervening sooner. But I wanted them to see you first, for who you really are,
before they were reminded of what they owe you.
She stepped down from the MIC, leaving a storm in her wake. Nadine, still standing, felt her throat tighten, not from shame, but from something deeper. Vindication, maybe. Not because someone spoke for her, but because someone finally said out loud what she'd been forced to live silently.
The room didn't just respect her now. It saw her.
As the crowd rippled with shock and whispered excitement, Nadine stood motionless, the afterglow of Eleanor's MIC drop still burning in her chest.
It was as if the room had been flipped upside down.
Suddenly, the woman they'd whispered about was no longer the ex.
She was the anchor of the entire evening.
Still reeling, Nadine stepped outside to catch her breath, the chill of the night air biting at her bare shoulders.
She didn't cry.
Not because she wasn't overwhelmed, but because something stronger had settled inside her. Resolve. She barely heard the door open behind her. Eleanor Prescott appeared beside her, hands folded neatly in front of her.
No theatrics now. Just presence.
I hope I didn't steal your moment, Eleanor said gently. Nadine turned to her, eyes narrowing with a complex mix of gratitude and disbelief.
You didn't steal it.
You turned it into something I didn't know was possible. Eleanor nodded, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folder. Inside were printed grant applications, Nadine's, going back years.
Some with handwritten notes in the margins. Familiar names were scribbled on sticky tabs.
I've been following you since your second clinic opened, Eleanor said. I used to read your proposals and think, this woman's doing with $80,000 what entire boards can't manage with millions.
That kind of leadership doesn't go unnoticed.
Unless people want to overlook it.
Nadine swallowed hard. So why now? She asked.
Why tonight? Eleanor's smile faded into something more serious.
Because silence is complicity.
And I've stayed silent for too long, watching these rooms celebrate inherited wealth and punish earned worth.
I helped build some of the institutions that let that happen.
It took watching you walk into this lion's den with your head high and still get publicly humiliated, for me to realize I had to do more than admire you from the sidelines. Nadine stared at her, the pieces slowly fitting together. The anonymous funder for our Bronx expansion.
That was you? Eleanor nodded. Through one of my shadow donors.
I couldn't attach my name without risking backlash from Oliver's circle. They never forgave me for stepping off the board when I refused to approve a real estate deal that would have pushed 3 black-owned businesses out of Harlem. A breath caught in Nadine's throat. This wasn't just a rich woman feeling guilty.
Eleanor had been fighting her own silent war.
I knew you didn't need saving, Eleanor said, her voice softer now. But I also knew what it felt like to be the only woman in the room expected to smile while they diminish you.
Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about recalibration.
Putting you back in the center of the story you've always owned. She handed Nadine a card. No logo, just a name and number. That's the head of the International Health Alliance.
They've been trying to replicate your clinic model in Brazil and Kenya. They just didn't know who to call. Now they do. Nadine held the card like it was made of gold. But she didn't cry. Not yet.
Instead, she met Eleanor's eyes with a quiet fire. Thank you for showing them what I could never say loud enough.
Eleanor leaned in.
You didn't need to say it, dear. You just had to walk in the room. As they turned back inside, Emily was gone. Oliver sat in the corner, no longer the center of gravity.
And Nadine? She was no longer orbiting anyone else's world. She was the world. And this was only the beginning.
The atmosphere in the ballroom was no longer celebratory. It was contemplative, uncertain. The chatter had dimmed to murmurs. A few guests quietly slipped out, avoiding eye contact. Others lingered in cautious clusters, glancing at Nadine with new eyes.
Not pity. Not scandal. Respect.
Nadine re-entered the room with Eleanor beside her, not as a prop or a statement, but as a force standing tall in her own right. Oliver stood near the champagne tower, still holding a half-full flute he hadn't touched since the toast.
His once effortless confidence now looked hollow. He stepped forward.
Nadine, he began, voice softer than she'd ever heard it.
I didn't know she'd. I didn't plan that speech.
I'm sorry.
She held his gaze without blinking. Not cold. Not angry. Just clear. You didn't need to plan it, she replied. You just needed to say something when it counted. And you didn't. He opened his mouth again, but no words came. That was always the issue. He had the right pedigree, the right suit, the right charm. But when it came time to speak truth, he chose silence. You once told me you admired my strength, Nadine continued. But the truth is, you admired it only when it didn't challenge your comfort. When I stopped shrinking, you stopped applauding. He looked down. His silence this time? It said more than any speech.
I don't resent you, Oliver, Nadine added. I actually thank you.
Because loving you taught me what I'll never tolerate again.
And walking away from you, without burning bridges, without a spectacle, taught me something even greater. That I don't need a seat at your table, when I've already built my own. Across the room, a few heads nodded subtly. She could feel it now, not just in the stares, but in the space.
People weren't watching a scene unfold. They were witnessing a shift.
Emily was gone, no tearful goodbye, no final jab.
Just gone. And somehow, that was fitting. Her absence said everything.
Eleanor approached with a quiet smile and held up her phone. You're trending in the one place that matters, my inbox. The WHO director wants to fly you out next month. And a UN policy consultant just asked for your clinic's blueprint. Nadine let out a breath, one she didn't realize she'd been holding all night. But her smile didn't stretch smug.
It was thoughtful. Grounded. This wasn't about revenge. It was about alignment. The night was never hers to win. It was hers to reclaim. She glanced back once, at the glittering room that had tried to bury her in politeness, then watched her rise anyway. She walked out, coat in hand, heels clicking like punctuation marks on polished marble. Each step away from that ballroom felt lighter. Stronger.
Not because she'd triumphed over Emily or silenced Oliver, but because, finally, she understood.
Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a prelude. And now, the world would hear her loud and clear.
3 weeks later, the air in Brooklyn was different. The wind carried the scent of roasted coffee, sidewalk food carts, and something else, possibility. On the corner of Green and Marcus, a sleek, white mobile clinic van stood parked beside a community center. Children played on the nearby steps while volunteers handed out flu prevention kits and healthy meals. A small but steady line of patients waited patiently, their faces lit with a rare blend of gratitude and dignity.
And inside the van?
Nadine Carter stood beside a nurse, reviewing charts, issuing orders, and laughing softly between updates. The woman who once stood in the shadows of penthouse expectations was now moving freely through the light of her own purpose.
No validation needed. No spotlight begged for.
Across the street, Eleanor Prescott leaned against a town car, arms crossed, smiling faintly.
I take it the rollout's a success, she asked.
Full capacity in the first hour, Nadine responded.
We already had to restock insulin.
I guess people heard we were serious.
They didn't hear it, Eleanor replied. They felt it.
There's a difference.
Nadine glanced at her phone.
A new email lit up, subject line, final approval, Kenya expansion, your team is cleared.
She didn't even blink. She simply slid the phone back into her coat and kept moving. That's who she was now.
Not a woman waiting for a door to open, but a woman building new doors.
And she wasn't walking through them alone. Eleanor, she said suddenly.
Why me? Eleanor looked puzzled. What do you mean? You could have backed any name. There are a dozen Ivy grads with polished decks and perfect teeth. Why me?
Eleanor's answer was quiet but firm. Because they speak the language of power. But you speak the language of people. You didn't start a clinic to get attention. You did it because people were dying in waiting rooms.
You didn't pitch investors. You sat in community board meetings until they gave you a chance.
She paused. You didn't rise by networking. You rose by serving.
That's the kind of legacy people remember. Nadine's throat tightened.
Not with pride. With clarity.
All the nights she'd questioned herself, doubted if walking away from Oliver meant walking away from opportunity, those nights seemed distant now.
They were stepping stones, not regrets.
Eleanor straightened up, sliding into the car. Next week's meeting with WHO is locked in, she added. And the UN Health Summit panel is yours, if you want it.
I want it, Nadine said. But I'm not changing for them. Eleanor smiled. Good. Because you are what's changing them.
As the car drove off, Nadine looked around. A girl on the steps, maybe 12, maybe younger, watched her.
Nadine waved. The girl waved back. That was the real victory. Not applause in a ballroom,
but recognition in the eyes of the next generation. She turned, stepped back into the clinic van, and closed the door behind her, not to shut the world out, but to continue building something better within it. And this time, she wasn't proving herself.
She was preparing others to rise.
This, she whispered, placing her stethoscope over her shoulders, is the real legacy.
Fade to black. Final on-screen text happy smiley.
Have you ever walked away from a place that refused to see your worth, and found your power waiting on the other side?
Share your story in the comments.
Because every voice deserves to be heard, and every story of rising matters. And if this one moved you, don't just watch.
Join us.
Like, subscribe, and let's build a world where no one has to shrink to fit in. Think back to the moment they looked you in the eye and counted you out. What did you do next? Fold or rise?
Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Because stories like yours deserve to be seen, not silenced.
And if this one lit a fire in you, don't just scroll past. Hit that like, share it with someone who needs to remember their worth, and subscribe, because around here, we don't just tell stories.
We rewrite the ending.